You've been on a 30-year quest to understand neuroscience, human connection, human happiness, effective teamwork, and the science of the extraordinary. Tell me about how you first discovered the connection between oxytocin and trust.
Yeah, so my lab was the first to show that oxytocin is this core signal. Oxytocin, which is a chemical made in the brain, is a core signal that someone around us appears to be trustworthy or safe. And it does a couple interesting things. It motivates us to cooperate with others. It increases empathy, so I'm better reading those social signals. And it actually reduces stress responses, improves the immune system. So social connection, we kind of know intuitively social connection is important, but this is a kind of a core driver of what's creating that. So I had done work in the late 90s showing that at the level of countries, interpersonal trust, a measure of interpersonal trust, was among the strongest predictors to identify which countries are rich and which countries are poor. So rich countries are by and large high trust countries, and poor countries have low trust. So all the places that we've both traveled, that we've talked about, Colombia, Venezuela, a lot of sub-Saharan Africa, very low trust. Right? This is sort of generalized trust. If I interact with you from a business perspective, are you likely to follow through? And when the answer is no, then you have a very small market. Then I can just trade with people I know. And so I don't really have the opportunity to benefit from economic growth. Anyway, so it's became very popular. World Bank flies me out. And inevitably, in giving talks, I would get the question, well, gosh, you explained why trust varies across countries, but within a country, why would two strangers ever trust each other? And I would kind of dodge that question for a while. And then after a while, you go home, you take a shower, you go, I suck. How can I be a trust expert? That's the most basic question. And so there was really no answer in biology and neuroscience, and started reading the animal literature and discovered this neurochemical oxytocin, which in rodents in particular seems to signal that this other, in a burrow, I can sniff it and go, oh, that's Kevin. He's always been cool to me. So I release oxytocin and we can interact with each other in a safe way. Right? So rodents assessing if the other one's safe is kind of like humans assessing trust. And it's all unconscious, right? So we designed protocols where we could measure the acute release of oxytocin by doing very rapid blood draws. And we did the first oxytocin infusion experiments. We shot, maybe not the first, one of the first, shot synthetic oxytocin through the nose up into the brain. And so we really discovered this key part of our human nature, if you will, which is that we're social creatures, right? We never met before. We've Zoomed a couple times, walking into your house and you don't seem stressed at all. That's weird for animals, right?
Yeah.
For a couple of chimpanzees, fur would be flying, blood would be flying. But we, as humans, we read each other pretty well. We go, yeah. Sometimes there's mistakes.
Loca gave you a little bit of hard time at
exactly
the gate.
Right. Your dog.
Other than that.
And so once you have a mechanism, you can ask interesting questions like, what promotes this mechanism? What inhibits it? Why do we have criminals? Why does it vary? So we spent about 20 years really digging in everything from doing experiments in the rainforest of Papua New Guinea to see if this is a universal mechanism to working with criminal psychopaths, on and on and on, to really understand our core social nature as human beings and how we can kind of lean into it or lean away from it.
Did you have a hypothesis going into the research that was disproven, or did you kind of understand where things were moving as you discovered them?
Yeah, we had great guides from the animal literature that we really thought oxytocin would be active, but like many chemicals in the brain and body, serotonin, dopamine, they're active in the brain, but also active in the peripheral nervous system. So oxytocin at the time was only known to be associated with contracting the uterus for birth and for initiating milk flow for breastfeeding. And so one of my colleagues who's an OBGYN said, that's the stupidest idea I ever heard of. Like, just a thing for women. Like, why would you even study this? But there's an interesting question there, right? Why would men's brains make oxytocin? Does it matter? Does it affect behavior? And the answer is yes, yes, yes. But anyway, I think it's been a great journey to really understand that core part of human nature and then ask additional questions like, can I fall in love with brands? Why do I love my iPhone so much? Can I really love an object in the same way I love a human? How about we've done a lot of work on animal-human interactions and animal interactions. So for example, we found that animals that live together cross species can, quote, love each other. That is, they can release oxytocin when they play. Like two males of different species can hang out and not be aggressive. Also very weird. But The important part is they have to grow up together, right? You have to be familiar with this other animal in a non-aggressive way.
And they would never get to that level of familiarity if they met each other as adults.
Generally less likely to have that happen. It still can happen, right? So
because they would be defensive in some way or another instinctually.
Right. So this is like, us crossing the street in some dark alley at 3 a.m. I'm going to be very acute on, right, you're a pretty healthy looking guy, so you might be able to hurt me. I may be able to hurt you. But if I see you on the street here, I'll smile, say hi. Right. So we call this set and setting. So I lived in Philly for 5 years. I got in fights there, like really aggressive place. And, you see 3 guys cross the street, at 2 a.m. on a dark street, stuff's going down, right? You got to be ready for that. So in Philly, I was always like on because there was just so much violence there. Where, here in Southern California, no big deal.
So you talk a little bit about how women primarily produce oxytocin, but men obviously do as well. Testosterone is known to decrease that level of trust, correct?
Right. Testosterone is a very potent trust oxytocin inhibitor. So it actually inhibits the release of oxytocin, which makes sense. If oxytocin motivates me to interact with you, to be emotionally connected to you, increased empathy. If you're aggressive, I don't want to care about your outcome. I want to be, more aggressive. So it tells us some interesting things. Males between 15 and 25, which you used to be, low empathy, high aggression, high risk-taking. We've done a lot of testosterone administration experiments. Overconfidence. Does it sound like anybody we ever saw, like ourselves? Sure. Right now, I can tell you an evolutionary story and why that's appropriate. But it's also why you send young men to war. It's why your testosterone goes up if you win a chess match, right? All these chemicals are working in the background. Like you get a promotion at work, your testosterone goes up. For men and for women, it's just more extreme in men because our testosterone levels are higher. Similarly, for women, estrogen increases the uptake of oxytocin. So for naturally cycling women, they have 2 spikes of estrogen per month, which means they're going to be much more variable on who they trust and who they don't. So why would evolution do that? If you're ovulating as a woman, you want to be careful who you interact with, right? You could get raped, or you could have sex with the wrong guy and carry some baby that you don't want to have. So it's like a kind of a break on, let's be careful.
So let me pose this a different way. There seems to be an epidemic of men that have low testosterone presently in the world. Does that play into, I would assume then men would trust each other more presently if they're low in testosterone rather than what may have been before?
Yes and no, right? So it depends. There's lots of social cues, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, guys, as guys, we kind of find those friends that kind of have the same personality we do, that want to, for me and you probably, I do active stuff. I don't want to sit around and whatever, BS for 3 hours and talk about feelings. It's the last thing I want to talk about. I have women to do that with me. So testosterone let's talk about men, is adjusting all the time at pretty rapid frequency. So for example, after a workout, your testosterone's up. You ever been to the gym and you get one of those, can I use a bad word, a dick in the gym who's sitting there like reading their phone, you're reading at that goddamn machine, and like, come on. And you're like, can I work with you? Or like, oh no, I got 3 more to do. Or like, no, you're reading your phone, right? So I've got a couple scrapes at gyms, like, don't be a fucking asshole, right? So get up. I want to get in, get out. I got stuff to do. Testosterone's high. I would expect that. It's very predictable. But when you're a committed relationship as a guy, your testosterone falls. When you have children, your testosterone falls. And the only evidence I have for this is my own experience. But when you have girl children like I do, and you pick out little dresses every day, you become a girly man. And so your testosterone's low, except when you need to turn it on. So there's a sort of, you may know this, but a high octane version of testosterone called dihydrotestosterone, which can be turned on really fast. So even if you're a man and you have lower or lowish testosterone, if you're threatened, if you have a challenge, you can turn on the DHT, the high octane version, pretty quickly.
Is that something that men should be worried about, of lowering testosterone as they get into relationships or as they have children?
Yes and no, right? So I think of oxytocin and testosterone as balancing each other. So your body's trying to maintain this balance. So if I have a romantic partner or children, I want to be more nurturing, right? The reason that humans are among the 7% of mammals that pair bond, because it's better for offspring to have 2 parents than 1 parent. So we're designed to pair bond. And so if I'm too aggressive with my wife, she's going to leave me, right? So that's not good. I'm too aggressive with my kids, I could kill them or something. On the other hand, because I have girl children, when they started dating, I said, hey, I'm going to become your agent. When you have a boy that's too aggressive, and this happened one time in my house, that's just bugging you, you let me know how far you want me to go. And I said, you think I'm a nice person because I'm nice to you, but I'm not a nice person. I'm a very mean person. And I will be mean to someone that you direct me to if you want me to. And so, one boy had to kind of brush back pretty hard. And I said to my daughter, like, if this boy even gets in my face, I will take him down. like, again, you've never seen me do this, but I've done it many times and it doesn't bother me. Like once you've been in fights, it doesn't really bother you. So I do worry about younger men, guys I know, who've never ever been in a fight. Like, didn't you play sports? Didn't you have a scrape on the basketball court or the football field? I've been in so many fights. It's like, yeah, it's not pleasant getting hit, but if you've been hit a couple times, you're like, I don't really care.
Yeah. Yeah. The sports piece definitely plays. And I played hockey growing up. So
there you go.
I understand that. And I played 2 years of juniors after high school. So I understand there were many fights, both in games and within the team itself.
Yeah. It partly because I have boredom and just high testosterone. But you can have a fight with a guy and then go give him a hug 10 minutes later. No big deal.
Take it back to oxytocin for a second. In your research, was there anything that surprised you?
A ton. I mean, you almost touched on this, and I'll follow up on it. For every experiment we've run in 20 years, we've measured the release of oxytocin. Across all those experiments, women always release more than men do. So, again, perhaps not surprising. Women are better at nurturing, have more empathy, on average, right? There's lots of variation. So that was kind of surprising. I sort of didn't want to believe that. I thought, it's too simplistic. But actually, that seems to be the case in many senses. The other
that men have less than women.
So it's not levels, it's changes, right? So they release less on the same kind of stimulus.
Understood.
Right. So the brain works on changes, not on levels. The other surprising thing is how potent stress is at inhibiting oxytocin release. So again, intuitively, you kind of know that if you're having a bad day, you haven't slept, you're not quite as nice, you're not quite as social and pleasant. But it's, again, sort of cortisol and the precursors to cortisol are very strong inhibitors. So what we found in this, 20-year saga is for about 95% of the people we've tested, which is thousands of thousands around the world, when you see bad behavior, people who are not reciprocating trust, people who are not generous, who are not cooperative, most of the time it's good people having bad days. So about half the people of that 5% who are 95% are doing just fine. Half those people have psychopathic traits. That's why we studied criminal psychopaths. They're not redeemable. I mean, there's a distribution of psychopathology, but basically cut them out of your life. They're dangerous. Leave them alone. And the other half, 2% or so have just kind of weird developmental histories, so trauma histories, abuse. And we've studied these patients as well, and they have kind of damaged brains. And so they're just going to be difficult to get around. The takeaway here is that for most people, when you see most people behaving badly, cutting you off in traffic, the guy at the gym reading his phone, who's not being pleasant, generally good people having a bad day. So I've become much more tolerant of other people. Like, oh, okay. So you're behaving like a dick now, but you're actually probably in real life not a bad person. Just something bad's happening to you now.
Because you see it through the lens as it's not them as a person, it's the experience they're having in that moment.
Yeah, their brain is doing some weird stuff because they're kind of in survival mode and they're just not in cooperation mode. And that's okay. So a good concrete story, guy at the gym who's older guy, great shape. I mean, for 70s, was a lifeguard. And I don't know, he was a very athletic guy and just kind of dicky about sitting on the machines. And, I need to get in and out. I go in the morning. And anyway, he was kind of aggressive with me one time. And then a week later, he walked over to me. I'm like, here we go, and he apologized to me. And he said, I was just having a bad day and I just didn't feel like talking to people. And I should let you work on the machines. I don't know what I was thinking. I've worked out at this gym for, decades. And shook my hand. And I'm like, fine, we've seen the gym, chat with him, nice guy. Just
well,
having
you have more
a bad
respect
day.
And trust for him now than you did before,
Absolutely, sure. What a great guy. Had this, the intestinal fortitude to walk over and apologize to someone. Great guy.
What can someone do if we know that is then an experience that's being had in the moment and not something that is them as an individual? What can people do in order to decrease the times that they need to come back to that or apologize for?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that, these pathways in the brain for responding to aggression or fear happen really fast and they're kind of preconscious. So just slow it down, take a breath, right? And go, okay, what's happening here? This is like if you're ever in kind of a dire situation or you get lost or hiking or something, the first thing to do is just stop and assess your situation. So I think the same thing to do in these social interactions. It's starting to become aggressive and just assess the situation, right? So what's the best thing for you? Jocko Willink, and so he says, the best thing to do if you're getting in a fight is run away. This guy's a freaking Navy SEAL. Why? What's the risk? You hit this guy and he hit his head. Now you're in jail because you just killed a guy by mistake. Or, it doesn't matter if he started it first. You're still going to be arrested and it's going to be bad for you for the rest of your life. So yeah, just, chill out. And I'm saying this like I do this all the time, but I'm trying to get better, right?
The stakes of what happens in that moment.
Slow it down. Yeah, just saying, this stakes are not worth it. And letting the ego go. And it's easier as you get older, right? Where you cut me off in traffic, I'm like, I just don't care anymore. When I was younger, I don't know. So the upside of high testosterone, by the way, is it's males who have a much higher tendency to enforce rules. So in experiments we've run where people violate social norms, it's the high testosterone males that will burn their own, in this case, money. I'll take money to punish you, to make sure you violated the rules. That's kind of a nice thing, right? This again, why there are more male police officers, more males in the military. Kind of think the rules are important, and there's a subset of males who will do that. By the way, if you look at people who run into burning buildings and jump in rivers to save children, it's generally blue-collar males, right? So they have physical jobs, and they have higher testosterone, and they're just going to get the job done and not complain about it. So for the guys listening, working out, essential. Getting enough sleep, essential. Great diet, essential.
The spending money to get back at someone for something that had happened is interesting if you look at that through the business lens, because someone would go out of their way in order to get money because they have high testosterone. And then if they burn someone, they would spend their own money to get back at the person, but they're in this cycle. So it almost seems to me as if self-awareness is the key in that, to know when you're being triggered and when those triggers are happening, whether you have high or low testosterone, to know how to take a breath, respond rather than react.
Much better said than I had said it. Exactly right. And then have a check-in person. Like if you have a couple good friends who will be honest with you at all times, to go, hey, this thing's happening. I am pissed off, and they're like, okay, let's walk through what's happening here. So just having someone to talk to helps to really clarify what's going on. And so in our internal monologue, we're like, this guy's an asshole. I want to kill him. Slow it down.
Taking a quick break from this episode to remind you that your inputs matter. This show was designed and created to help you build a high-performing, healthy, wealthy life. So if you feel that you're getting value from this episode, please go ahead and share it with someone that you feel would get value as well. Now, fun fact, 90% of listeners of this show are not actually subscribed to the podcast. So if you would take a moment and go ahead and tap the subscribe button, it would mean the world to me. Thank you so much for being here. Now back to the show. You did a study in which you offered money to someone, and then you were able to either double it or triple it if they passed it on, correct? Walk me through, explain the study to me, and walk me through the reasoning or logic behind what you discovered in relation to trust and oxytocin in that moment.
Great. So this was a behavioral protocol developed by a Nobel Prize winner in economics named Vernon Smith, who's kind of an early mentor of mine. And it was a way to measure trust and trustworthiness without asking people that question, right? So again, I'm a behavioral neuroscientist. I think what people tell me is mostly bogus because we make stuff up or we don't know, but behavior wins in my boat. So the task is recruit a bunch of people. You both get $10 for showing up. Everyone's instructed the same way. There's zero deception, and you're randomized to be the first decision maker or the second decision maker. And after lots of examples and chance to ask questions, you sit down at a computer in a partition station, you're matched to someone else in the lab you can't see, but it's a real person. And the first decision maker gets a prompt by computer that says, if you want to give up some of your $10 and shoot to this other person you've been matched to, you'll lose that amount of money. It'll come out of your account, but it'll be tripled in the other person's account. The other person will then get a message by computer saying, dude one sent you, let's say 5 out of the 10, that turned into 15. as a reminder, we ran these at UCLA just down the street from you, and turned out that kids at UCLA can't add $10 to their how much they receive. So we remind them 10 plus 15 is 25. You have $25 in your account. Do you want to send some amount back to the first person? So what Vernon Smith, this Nobel Prize winner, told me is that, this sort of transfer from the first to the second person is a signal of trust. Like we both understand the structure of this interaction. I'm going to sacrifice to make you better off on the expectation that I trust that you get this system and send money back to me. But if you're the second decision maker and you like money, why would you send money back? So it kind of captures this underlying social norm of, you're nice to me, I should be nice to you. So anyway, this Nobel Prize winner guy said, we have no idea why would you, if you're going to anticipate that guy 2 likes money and he's going to keep it all, if you're guy 1, why would you ever send money? But almost everybody does. And almost everyone who receives money returns it. So by doing blood draws in this experiment and measuring oxytocin and a bunch of other neurochemicals, we found that the more person 2 receives, the more their brain released oxytocin, and the more oxytocin their brain released, the more money they returned. So I think of oxytocin as the biological basis for the golden rule. You're nice to me, my brain makes this chemical. I go, oh, this guy's cool. I'll play nice with him. And I think of testosterone as the anti-golden rule. You want to play bad with me? I'll play worse.
Was there a diminishing return point where they stopped giving money back because it got to a large enough amount?
Oh, what a great question. Yeah, it really diminishes. So we ran a study where we did $500. This is tax money. We did $500 funded by one of the agencies with 3 letters that was very interested in trust in, let's say, in settings with conflict. And so, so we did $500 tasks, but we let people talk face-to-face beforehand. So when you talk face-to-face for a $10 trust decision, everyone kind of plays nice because, it's $10. I got to see you on the way out. It's going to be embarrassing if I screw you over. So it turns out for $500 on the line, when you talk, everyone says, oh, of course, I'll share with you. You share with me. It's all good. A third of the people who promised to send money to the other person screwed them over. What we found was that the people, while they were talking, they knew they were going to screw their partner over. They had this big stress response, and when we assessed their emotional state after that decision, they were really unhappy. So these are psychologically healthy people, but like, man, $500, I really need that money. And so, yeah, but on the other hand, 2/3 of them promised to cooperate, and they actually did. So again, think of that sort of circumstances driving a lot of the brain responses as opposed to what's called the fundamental attribution error. You behave badly, and I attribute that to your bad personality. What we find in experiments, again, over many years, is generally it's just you're having a bad day. Your brain's not functioning properly. You're too tired. Think of how disinhibited we get with lack of sleep, like from travel, right? You're just crankier.
So the people who premeditated it had a higher stress response than anyone else.
Yeah. So selfish people are stressed and unhappy.
Were there people who didn't premeditate that you were able to distinguish that still screwed them over?
We couldn't find those people. So almost everyone who screwed them over,
they knew they were going to
do it, even though they promised they were lying. So that, again, for healthy people, lying is a stress response. You might be able to read my, facial tics or whatever and figure out I'm lying. So it's hard to lie to people.
Why do people then lie?
Money's on the line. They're desperate. And we tried to figure out a sort of profile of these people was males and females. There's no real profile, young, old.
Because it becomes a need rather than a want, maybe?
Lower income was a predictor, by the way.
I guess goes back to the trust piece, too.
Yeah.
Higher income assumes that they're able to then repay the other person or vice versa, and lower income means that I'm never getting back what I had given to this individual.
Yeah, trust is kind of a luxury in some level, right? Imagine driving cross country and your car breaks down and you get towed to some, podunk gas station in Kansas, and he sees your license plate and he goes, oh, yeah, it's going to be, you got a broken Johnson rod and it's going to cost you $500. And you're like, I never heard of a Johnson rod. I'm sure I'm getting scammed. You're like, $500 gets me the hell out of here. I'll just pay it, right? So you're behaving as if you trust this guy because you have the luxury of doing that, where if that's your only transportation and you have no money, you're like, man, I'm going to have to fix that myself. Whatever a Johnson rod is, I got to go to whatever AutoZone and buy one and install it myself. So again, you have this kind of ability to behave as if you trust because it's not worth it to investigate this person.
We spoke a little bit before about the conference I was at this past weekend called Money Is. And one of the interesting things that I've seen in business that, but I was really like laid out very clearly over the weekend, was that the higher and higher up you get in business, the more and more business you're doing with those that you know, like, and trust. So you're like, I'm going to move money to you and you're going to move money back to me. And we're going to continue to do this because you can't self-deal if you're operating from these different accounts. And the piece that is the fallacy is that individuals believe when they start a business, they need to take in order to get to the place where they're able to then give. But if you do that, you're never going to show up in a way that is philanthropic or trustworthy, because you're always coming from this transactional rather than relational perspective. How has, because I know you've also done a lot of work in corporate America as well, as relates to trust, how have you seen this play out from a business perspective, from specifically down the leadership path?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the difficulty, if you're a leader, whether it's a small group, sports team, or a big group, is that social status increases testosterone in men and women. So as we said earlier, that makes you more self-focused, less other-focused, less cooperative. So you really have to fight that. That's where this kind of self-insight, being self-aware, as you said, is really important. Because if I'm just kind of going on autopilot, I'm like, I'm the goddamn boss. Why are you questioning things, right? And it's hard. In my own startup, every once in a while, I have to check myself. Like, I have some, people who maybe don't have the best social skills, like developers who are maybe not as, maybe a little Asperger-ish. And those would be very blunt and say, like, that's just a stupid idea. And I'm thinking in my brain, like, that's my goddamn company. Why were you? But then I think, okay, how wonderful that they can just speak their mind. Why should someone be kowtowing to me? I'm not special. I just had the idea and I put the company together, but I'm not special in any way, right? So yeah, so I have to check that. So again, it's that sort of slowing down, self-awareness. Like, awesome, yeah, speak up. We're going to move fast, right? We're going to die. So what we found is leaders that are more vulnerable, more empathic, tend to be more successful. That is, longer term, they're staying in their jobs. They're associated with higher rates of return on their stocks. And the stock market rewards those companies for having good CEOs. If you look at these surveys of the best companies to work for, again, much higher stock returns in those companies, lower employee turnover. And we did a study where we genotyped hedge fund traders on Wall Street. Literally went to Wall Street and collected saliva. So you think finance is the one area where it's kind of a zero-sum game, right? In most business settings, I want you to win because I can win too. We're going to win together. So there's a big motivation to cooperate, typically. But at Wall Street, if you win, I'm going to lose, right? And vice versa. So, okay, who has long tenure on Wall Street? So we couldn't get how much money you make. It just wasn't possible. But the washout rates on Wall Street are very high. So let's just have a bunch of people and then assess how long they've worked on Wall Street. We found that genes associated with cooperation, with deferring gratification, predicted how long you'd keep your job on Wall Street. So big benefit to cooperation, big benefit to being trustworthy. I don't know, share the wealth. It doesn't have to go around. Let's all cooperate.
Yeah, I've also heard that one of the, you could correct me if I'm wrong on this too, but I've also heard that the zero-sum game, the cooperation, yes, and delayed gratification, yes, lead towards success in a financial game or business game. One of the other predictors of long-term success is a fear of insecurity, essentially. So individuals that are constantly striving to get more and to progress towards the next level actually have a subconscious insecurity of the fear of not enough. And because of that, with the delayed gratification is this perfect concoction, perfect recipe that has actually allowed them to progress to the place that they exist at in the world.
Right, but then you have this sort of neuroses about never being satisfied. And so those individuals tend to be unpleasant to be around. And what you see is leadership staff turns over fast. You just want to be around someone who's neurotic. They tend to be unhappy. They have outbursts. They're cranky. So, what was this book a while ago? The No Asshole Rule. I follow that, right? When I hire people, I love people who are outspoken. And again, sometimes it can be grating, but that's okay. But yeah, if you're really undermining the rest of the people, like don't do that. You need to go.
Yeah. What would you say, or what would you recommend from a leadership perspective of things that your boss, or if you are the boss, you could do in order to create a deeper community of trust within your company?
Yeah, I think my evolving view is that we should really think about this as the inverted pyramid. If you're a leader, your job is to create successful employees around you. So I think it's listening more than speaking. It's making sure that everyone is becoming successful and being open and vulnerable. So, the guy who had a Red Hat, the Linux operating system, Jim, just lost his name. I have a great quote from him in one of my previous books, and he said, I don't know everything. And when people ask me things, I just say, I don't know. That's great. But these guys over here know, right? So you want to facilitate that kind of open discussion. So if you are, as a leader, if you're faking it, if you're a little mini God, people know. They don't know what you know and know what you don't know. So, just be honest about it. So it turns out that a leader who is competent and vulnerable, people work much harder, right? Because you're like, yeah, you are who you are. I have to put on some kind of fake facade when I go to work so that people don't understand how insecure I am. You're burning all kind of energy on that and not creating value for the organization. So that'd be who you are.
Yeah. Authenticity wins, and then you're not burning the candle from both ends.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about Immersion neuroscience. First off, what is it?
So it is the first neuroscience as a service platform that lets anybody measure what the brain loves in real time by applying algorithms to data we pull from smartwatches and fitness wearables. So you have been to the DMV, you've been to the post office, generally not fabulous experiences. Why? Well, first of all, we're asking people, do you like this? And this is just a dumb question. So again, I'm a behavior guy. So I want to know, how can we create an amazing experience for customers? How come 80% of Hollywood movies lose money year after year? Mind-blowing that we don't know good from bad, because we're asking people to do the impossible, which is relate to me your unconscious emotional response to this experience. So we have what I call the Freudian hangover. We somehow think for this whack job Freud that if I just poke you the right way, I can make the unconscious conscious. And that's not the way the brain works. I can't make your liver tell me about your breakfast. I can't get your brain to reveal its unconscious emotional responses. So this is work we started doing 15 years ago, funded by the U.S. Department of Defense and some other agencies, that asked us to identify combinations of signals in the brain that would accurately and consistently predict what people would do after a message or an experience. So they wanted to give soldiers the superpower of persuasion. They'd use words rather than weapons, try to influence both our allies and potential our enemies to cooperate with the U.S. Great. That's a very noble endeavor, and we burned a couple $1 million of taxpayer money figuring this out. And once we did find these signals that in combination capture the value we get from social emotional experiences, we had some media attention, and then frankly, companies started showing up with suitcases full of money at my lab and saying, hey, we want to create better marketing, better customer experiences, and can you help us? So there seemed to be a market for that. Launched a platform 6 years ago, and we all want to have great experiences, but most of the time it's either just mundane or frustrating. So by having a scalable technology, which you don't have to talk to weirdos like me, you can just measure whatever you're measuring, you can make them better. So concrete example, I talked about Hollywood. A number of the Hollywood studios use our technology to measure and improve movie trailers. So the distributors of movies get paid the most the first 2 weeks a movie's out, and then it declines after that. So they really need to get butts in chairs the first couple of weeks. So they spend a lot of money creating movie trailers, and they've been using our tech to rough out some trailers, measure a bunch of people, and go, okay, well, of these 7 trailers we made, these 2 have the highest immersion, that value your brain places on something. Let's edit those things up. Let's test them again, edit. So that's the value of having a piece of software and not a scientific experiment, is you can just continue editing till this experience is great.
And so they're bringing people in those initial weeks as a test group to watch the trailer and then see the response, and that's the trailer that they run with?
Yeah, so they'll edit these trailers, for weeks and weeks and weeks, 10, 20 times sometimes. So I was at one of the studios, I'll just suppress the name, and I pulled up a trailer, so I was sort of pitching them to use our technology, and I said, let's pull up one of your recent movie releases. And one of the guys in the room goes, oh, I made that trailer. I hate that thing. I've seen this so many times. I'm, all right, well, let's test it. Gave him some wearables. And I had one guy who was over the moon neurologically, super immersed in that trailer. Who was it? The guy who made it. But on self-report, he said, I hate it. I'm tired of it. But it was his little baby. So in his brain, he had this huge peak immersion response. So the takeaway from this is people lie. And they don't lie because they're malicious. They lie because we're forcing them to give a quantitative evaluation of something that's highly emotional. So by having a technology that allows us to capture those true emotional responses, then we can iterate and just get it better and better. And whether it's movies, marketing, customer experiences, the employee experience space is really interesting, right? If we think about what we've seen in the Immersion world, we've got over 50,000 observations now on the platform. Is that when you add a social layer to an experience, it always increases immersion. Right? Think of, ordering on your phone, food versus sitting down to a nice restaurant and having a server, oh, hey, thanks for coming in. My name is Bob. And, it's a whole different experience. Right now, that human can also degrade the experience, but generally it increases it. So we still want those human interactions. We're still social creatures.
Is there a specific wearable that you tend to lean towards when doing these tests?
We're device agnostic, so we'll use people's own wearables or companies like Accenture and EY have used our platform for many years, and they'll just mail low-cost wearables. So there's a really nice one by a company in Oxnard, California here called Scosh, which we like a lot. But Whoop, Polar, Apple Watch is fabulous, Samsung Galaxy, they're all quite good.
Is there a degree of variability between each one that you have to adjust for?
Oh, good science question. Exactly, there is. So we use a medical grade electrocardiogram. So we're feeding it heart rate, but writing code to infer brain activity, since the brain ultimately controls the heart. Yeah, that's why we're device agnostic. We don't need a special device. So we'll compare everything to the medical electrocardiogram and then write code that makes all those devices comparable. So if you were in a measurement and we had 18 different devices, we'd want those all to be comparable.
How are then businesses using this within their own organization for employee benefit?
Yeah, a lot of it is, first of all, we're just running out of humans, right? Birth rates are really low around the world. And so we've really got to keep the people working.
Which is the opposite, I should say, of what most people think.
Yeah, no, there's a huge gap between the people who are looking for work and the number of open positions. So yeah, we've got to take care of these people. And the population is aging on and on and on. So employee wellness is really important. And we have focused a lot, as you and I have discussed, on the sort of physical aspect of wellness, right? We're going to put in a yoga studio, or we're going to have a class, or we're going to help you with nutrition. But the emotional fitness part is equally important. And so that's where we're really bringing this to market, is our emotional fitness product. So that individuals, just like you have a goal for steps, 10,000 steps was just made up. So there's no science behind that. But there's a goal for emotional fitness. So just like you can build up your physical fitness, you can build up your emotional fitness by having enough high immersion experiences to build up that capacity to be present and emotionally open. And that's how we sustain stronger relationships, right? So I'm older than you, but I have, 5 guy friends that I've known forever that would, kill for me if I asked them. So like when you have one of your guy friends go like, hey, Paul, I love you, buddy. I'm like, yeah, I love you too. Like you need a couple of those people in your family that you can count on whenever you need them. And if you have that, your emotional fitness is high. But it requires investing in that relationship, right? It means you got to go do stuff with these guys, or, for me, usually it's outdoor stuff. So we're going to go do something, get sweaty, get dirty. And then we've been through some weird stuff together, or traveled. And then you're like, you really know these people, right? You get to know them really well. So, it's kind of like dating. It's in the brain, the mechanisms are almost identical. So if you're dating someone who takes, but never gives, you're like, hey, why am I in this relationship? I got nothing out of this. So same thing with your friends. You've got to invest in the relationships, and they generally will reciprocate, a la Oxytocin, and build up their emotional fitness. But now to gamify it and to measure it objectively, neurologically, it gives individuals and increasingly employee wellness programs, and hopefully soon health insurers, a way to keep people from that kind of bane of loneliness. Depression rates are just going through the roof. So, the physical part, like if you don't know by now, moderate diet, get exercise, get a good night's sleep. That's the first 3 pillars for extending your health span. Everyone should know that, right? Now, whether you can do it or not is a different thing, but everyone should know that. The 4th is, am I emotionally fit? Do I have a rich social life? Well, what does rich mean? Rich means neurologically, I've got to have these close connections. These people who really care about me or love me, who I have this strong relationship with, so that in life and have inevitably kicks me in the gut, I've got people I can call on, people that support me.
Part of this process and this experience and experiment initially into immersion is understanding the science of extraordinary. How would you define extraordinary?
Extraordinary, I would define it neurologically, not surprisingly, right? So it's an experience that induces this peak immersion experience. So immersion, again, is the brain's evaluation mechanism for social emotional experiences. And it's a metabolically costly investment in processing all parts of this experience. So that's why earlier I said, when you have high emotional fitness, you learn to be really present, right? So if I'm distracted, even if we're having a conversation, I'm not plugged into what you're saying. I'm not looking at your facial expressions. It's not a great experience. But when I have these peak immersion experiences, my brain goes, holy crap, this is really valuable. And those high emotional experiences, so emotionality is a kind of key evaluation mechanism that drives up immersion. The brain says, oh, this is important. I'm going to save this in a very special way. So if you think of your own life, these really peak emotional experiences that you've thought of, they're easily recalled because your brain goes, hey, important. I'm going to put these literally on the top of your brain, right on the cortex. And so the same thing happens in a business setting, right? When I see a movie that's like life-changing, or I have a dinner that is just like mind-blowingly good, like, man, I want to do this again. Like, this was awesome. Whatever this cost, was worth it. I stayed at a resort, and we talked about this before, in South Africa called One and Only in Cape Town. Mind-blowingly good, 5-star resort, never stayed at a place like that before. And it was just, every aspect of it was wonderful. And, I have such amazing recall, even now, a year later, of the details, of the uniforms, of the physical space of that, the spa. So have I told zillions of people about it? Yeah, I have. Absolutely. I remember the whole thing.
I see this both on, I have dove into this because I lost my mom when I was 17, but I see this both on what is we would perceive to be positive and negative experiences, and the depth of the experience and the depth of which it sits within your body as well, which is why we're then able to pinpoint these things. So I often have said that I think, quote unquote, having a traumatic experience early on that gave me something to pinpoint and work through and expand into was actually to my benefit, because I didn't have little things here and here, and I was searching for what's the reason that I respond this way and why do I feel this way here? It was like, oh no, here's a very prominent event that expanded my thought process and really led me to where I am today. Do you see, I know we spoke right then about the positive experiences that people are tracking. Do you also see the negative experiences as giving people an opportunity to work through something and grow more than a positive?
Yeah. So what you faced was what's called post-traumatic growth, right? So you had a traumatic experience that gave you an opportunity to kind of refocus your life on kind of best and highest use for you. And it doesn't always happen, but we do see that sometimes negative experiences have this high emotional resonance. They're very meaningful to you. And those will show up neurologically as peak immersion experiences as well. So it's a very good question. It doesn't necessarily have to be like joy and, jumping up and down, you're so happy. Those can be peak immersion experiences. But if they're meaningful to you, again, the brain's going to process that with a lot of metabolic investment because it's valuable to you. And the brain actually does things that can be traumatic that it suppresses. So, for example, in car accidents, like serious car accidents, there's generally what we call retrograde amnesia. You actually don't remember the accident, right? If you say lost consciousness, you'll lose about 10 seconds before that accident. Not important. It was traumatic, but you're not going to learn anything from that, right? Just like, I guess, be more careful driving or whatever. But so there's this sort of protective mechanisms. But when we go through trauma, we certainly see this. Now, everyone doesn't have that experience. Sometimes trauma carries your entire life and there's no growth from it. So again, for listeners, it's much more complicated than something bad happened and I grew from it. Sometimes something bad happens and it sucks and it can ruin your whole life. So I've done a lot of work with patients who suffer severe abuse, emotional, sexual abuse, and many of them had permanent changes in their brain and they just can't function well. So that, the abuse ends, but the pain doesn't end with that. So maybe we'll slip to the positive side. On the positive side, for companies that can create these peak immersion experiences, not only are they valued at the time point as important, but part of the mechanism of immersion creates a craving to repeat it. So again, similar to dating. See that cute guy or girl and you're like, holy crap, I want to see this person again, right? So same thing when you have this, if I ever go back to Cape Town, I know where I'm staying for sure, right? And so that same kind of experience where it creates a craving to repeat it because it was so valuable to you. So I think that's the reason that these companies that play in the experience economy have very high profit margins, because they're creating out of the ordinary experiences that are not only, again, acutely valuable, but valuable as you remember them and creates a desire to repeat them.
Does diminishing returns exist on those experiences?
That's a great question. I don't know for sure. I do know that when we look at short-term high immersion experiences like movies, like even ads, storytelling, they don't diminish, which is surprising. Yes. So, a great experience is a great experience is a great experience. So I think we do see for example, the resort space, people coming back year after year after year because it's so great.
I asked because the story or thought that I had in my head was like taking a child on a first class flight for the first time. And they go on the first class flight, everything else before that is inferior to the expectation that was set. And then they fly private, and now first class is no longer the expectation. So it's a continual level up until you get to a place where there is no additional 5-star resort experience. And because of that, that becomes your baseline. And if that's your baseline, then do you get the same response or the same feeling from it as if you did it for the first time?
Right. So I think if you're uber wealthy and you're always kind of at that very high level, then your expectations are so high. Remember, the brain works on differences. So there's no place to go up. You can only go down. So in the book, I actually talked about my daughter and I flying back from Hawaii. She was like 10 or something. And they bumped us up to first class because I fly a lot on United. Thanks for United. And they had the meal, they had the ice cream cart, they make the sundaes in front of you. And my daughter was just through the moon, right? So now she doesn't get that all the time. So when she does, it's a real treat because she can't always be there. So it's actually the variation that she wants, right? You don't want to try to maximize that level. You want to have, I love Walmart. If you need cheap stuff, and the people are fabulous at Walmart. Like it's the most democratic place you can shop in the world. But if I want something nice, I'm not going to go to Walmart. But if I want, I don't know, a spatula, sure, go to Walmart. Who cares?
Talk to me a little bit about digital interaction. So obviously it is currently surpassing in-person communication, and it has for a while. Part of the reason we spoke about that I started the podcast was to deepen the in-person connections that I could have with individuals rather than just having a transactional show up online, create content, and then drop off. And since the release of Oxytocin, yes, it can be digital, but correct me, is there a greater increase of Oxytocin release or a greater amount released when you're experiencing things in person as opposed to virtually?
Great question again. And what a pleasure to be with you in person. I think it's important you're doing this. Yeah. So we found actually pre-COVID lockdowns that the 2D interaction, video interaction, causes between 50 and 80% of oxytocin release relative to in person. So pretty high, surprisingly high to me. So, an example I give of that is something you and I have never done, but we've heard that people do this, which is cry at the end of movies, right? The dog dies, the girl dies, whatever, and people cry. That's super weird neurologically, right? If you're cognitively intact, you're aware there's a fictional story, these are paid actors, why would you cry? Because we've really been transported into someone else's world. So one of the beautiful things about having this acutely attuned social brain, using immersion as that evaluation mechanism, is that we can transport ourselves into other people's worlds really easily. So that in-person is super valuable. So even though in-person does release more oxytocin, produces higher immersion, we get more out of it. I'm getting all from looking at you, right? I'm getting facial expressions, I'm getting body language, I'm getting breathing, I'm getting smell. All those things are actually really important.
Do you think that technology in a way can bridge the gap, or is it diluting the experience?
I think the technology gives us more opportunities to interact. Think of like I have young adult children, they're meeting their friends all the time online. Now, it does degrade your skills to meet in person if you're only doing things online. Online is scheduled, and let's talk about employees as a more concrete example. If I'm working remotely and I never see anybody I work with, I still get to know them, I still like them, but it's a whole different ballgame than if I'm physically around them and then we bump into each other at lunch or we have lunch together or we know whatever's going on. You get the chance for bonding. So again, humans very rapidly form attachments to others, and those attachments are stronger if we're in person than if we're online. I do worry about, the swiping for dating. Like, you're not getting many social cues, you're just getting looks basically, which, for some people, maybe that's enough, but you're not getting all that personality issues, again, even smell. So this is maybe going too far down a rabbit hole, but turns out when we look at, we have these different tissue types called HLA types, that we actually prefer people who are different than us in terms of our underlying antibodies, but not too different. Now, how do you know that looking at a picture? Well, maybe if they, kind of look the same ethnic group maybe, or have some features that are attractive to you. So that is mediated primarily by smell. If I can't smell that person I'm interested in dating, or I can't smell that other employee I work with, unconsciously, of course, all unconscious, then I'm not really going to form those super strong bonds.
Smell plays a bigger role than sight?
Bigger is hard to say. It certainly plays a role. For dating, it's really important. I think as you get older, that kind of compatibility becomes more important than when you're younger. It's all about looks, right?
Yeah.
And for men focus more on looks, and women focus more on brains, and there's evolutionary reasons for that as well.
Back to the connection piece, I noticed that in a very concrete example way. I ran a team that was completely virtual during the pandemic, and I had never met any of them in person. They were all over North America. And then when the world reopened, we all went to an offsite in South Florida, and it was the first time I had met all of them in person. And the energy that the company had following that trip was tenfold what it was prior, even though nothing had changed other than the fact that we had a shared experience together.
Yeah, exactly right. So I think from an office leadership perspective, I'd like to see people in the office 2 days a week. I think one's a little bit too little, but 2 to 3 days a week is not unreasonable to ask people. Now, some people are distributed and they're working far away, but in that case, if you're a leader, either physically go there or have the offsite. It's really important. And we somehow get energy from people. You do public speaking like I do. And if you do enough public speaking, you learn how to somehow absorb the audience's energy and kind of reflect it back to them. Where if you've ever given a talk in a, half-empty theater, it's just not, you just don't have that energy. It's like, oh man, nobody showed up.
The benefits of theater than film.
Exactly right.
Instant gratification from the audience itself, and the energy is transferable.
Yeah, and then it reflects back on the audience. You go, man, this is a great play. It's amazing.
Yeah, and then you say, this show is how was the performance tonight? It was electric because the audience was invested, and then because the audience was invested, the actor also got to play it at a much, much higher level too.
Right, and we see the same thing at work, right? We feed back on each other. Now, it could be a negative feedback too, when we, again, no assholes, right? Let's get those people out. But usually it's positive. Like, oh my gosh, you did this amazing thing and you work at the desk next to me. I had no idea. So I've been to Google, half a dozen times, to give a talk. And then, they always take you to lunch, the famous lunch at Google. And every time I've been, they have these long kind of picnic tables. The people sitting next to each other don't know each other. They're like, oh, are you in the machine learning group? Oh no, I'm in computer vision. They're like, start talking to each other and they sort of have this little bonding moment, right? So if you schedule a meeting, you just don't have that kind of bonding.
I feel like a lot of ideas come that way too.
For sure.
They create the environment of where this commingling can happen. And because of that, things that I would have never spoken to you in this setting. And because of that, now we're sharing ideas that these departments may have never been able to interface with each other before.
Exactly. There was a study done by professors at Harvard Business School that showed in Silicon Valley, engineers that socialized more at work were more productive. For exactly the reason you said, because they knew everybody. So they're working on a project like, oh, Kevin, he knows how to do it. Oh, yeah, hey, Kevin, come over here, help me with this thing, right? So that socializing is actually really valuable at work. Now, if you're socializing 8 hours a day, we have to have a discussion. But yeah, that kind of random interaction, get to know someone personally, but also, what do? We talk about work all the time. It's a kind of a weird thing. This is why Europeans suck. Oh, no, sorry. All the European people are pissed because they love the 6-week vacation. I can hardly do a week vacation. I have the best job ever. I love doing it. I want to do it 24/7. It's so much fun for me. And so, yeah, I talk about work all the time.
Well, that belief contradicts the thought process, which in a good way contradicts the thought process that I need to do everything myself. Because a team is 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2. It can be multiples. Because if I would say the way to redefine it is the question is who, not how. And if you know who can do the job better than you, now you're creating an ecosystem where everyone's able to build upon what each person's strengths are rather than trying to capitalize on one person's weakness or take everything for yourself.
It's even better than that. Then those individuals get the satisfaction of doing something they're good at. Now they feel great about their job and gives them a chance to grow, right? So once people are trained, I want to give them a long leash. So I say, train extensively and then delegate generously. I want you to do your thing. You're a pro at this. I'll give you some guidance. I'll check in with you. But yeah, I don't want to micromanage you. Otherwise, again, I'm just sucking up all your satisfaction from doing something that's interesting.
Have there been any discoveries that you found within your work that have altered how you perceive the world or alter how you approach interaction in a team environment?
Absolutely. First of all, yeah, I was, I'm not the warmest person by personality. I mean, I can just tell you that. And so when I first started managing larger groups of people, I had a system called ROAR. ROAR stands for Results Only Analytical Research. In other words, don't whine, hit your milestones, and I don't care. Stay up all night if it takes to get it done. Complete failure because it didn't add in the human component, right? Which is, hey, my job is to support you. It's to make sure you're successful. So now I basically do a 3-question check-in with my team. What'd you do yesterday? What's your plan today? What can I help you with? That's it. That's all I really need to know, right? I mean, we're getting reports, we have data, but from a human interaction, that's a stand-up. That's a 5-minute stand-up with my team, right? Per person. So, hey, I'm stuck on this thing. Awesome. I can help you with that, or I can find someone who can help you with that. Let's work on that thing. As opposed to, where's the goddamn report, which just doesn't work very well.
Do those 3 questions aid to building trust? The reason I ask, and I'll clarify, because I have seen sometimes, and at least in myself, where I feel the need to have the small talk, to build a quote unquote rapport before the actual thing happens. But in the grand scheme of things, the rapport is built by doing the thing together, not by having the what's the weather conversation.
Yes and no. I tend not to be a small talk person, but I find that humans actually like the small talk. And we would do that if we were physically in the same space, right? So remotely, we try to small talk, but it's not as effective. It's like, remember during the lockdowns, we tried to do like monthly happy hours. And the first one was so much fun on Zoom. And then after that, we just stopped doing it. It just wasn't the same. So I think the small talk's valuable because it's what we do anyway to kind of bond. We find something in common we can talk about, right? But yeah, I think the question of whether the 3 questions build trust is a good one. I think they establish my role as being of service to the people around me. So I want to make sure that, I try to do 2 things from a leadership perspective. One is I try to take the worst job first. Whatever crap job it is, I will always volunteer to do it first. If I'm not willing to do it, why should anyone else do it, right? If it's on the ground, if it's customer facing or it's a trip, I will learn so much about what our business is doing, what our customers think. So we got to be on the ground, right? That's important. But also I want them to know like, hey, I'll suck it up, right? Travel this, I don't know, I can't mention a city, but anyway, I got locked out of going to a city in the Midwest and I was kind of excited about going there. It was going to be fun. And I got snowed out because of the snowstorm a couple of weeks ago. And they're like, why don't you send somebody? I'm like, it's like, middle of nowhere. I'm like, yeah, but these are important customers. I'll only talk to them on Zoom. I want to see them use our technology in person. And I'm setting that expectation that everyone's going to have to suck it up once in a while, right?
Can always be servant leadership to a T.
Absolutely. Yep.
A couple final questions for you here, and this has been extremely informative. So thank you very much for the time. Do you see any limitations from a neurological perspective into understanding the human condition? Or is there anything that you believe we won't ever be fully able to comprehend from a scientific standpoint?
What a great question. So we are able, using immersion, using our technology, to predict individual and market behaviors regularly in the kind of 90% accuracy range, predicting hit songs, how much movies will sell at the box office, on and on and on, because the data are very, very rich and the brain's highly nonlinear. So we apply things like machine learning to these data, you really pop out on the accuracy. That can be kind of scary. If I'm predicting hit songs 3 months in advance with 97% accuracy, where's the role for creativity? Where's the role for the artist? But it turns out that the brain has this underlying randomness to it that's sort of keeping the pipes open, if you will, just randomly activates in some weird ways. So I don't think we're ever going to get to a point, even with things like Elon Musk's Neuralink, where we're really going to get 100% accuracy. And even predictions like the predictions I talked about are average predictions. This is why lie detectors are not admissible in court. And we other people have done work with the government looking at sort of neurologic lie detectors. There's so much individual variation on how people respond to a stimulus. And even within yourself, when we measure, you today and you a week from now doing the same task, we'll see different patterns of brain activity. So we're highly variable. And that's part of the beauty of the human species, is that we're all kind of weirdos. And, that means that we're going to be unpredictable. So again, for listeners, you're a weirdo. You don't know you're unpredictable because your brain's doing different things. But everyone outside you is going, what the hell is this person doing? So it means we all can have to accept each other's weirdness. And that makes life really interesting. So as I said earlier, just working with psychiatric patients and all kinds of, quote, healthy, normal individuals who may be having a bad day, I'm just totally tolerant of the weirdness. In fact, I enjoy it. I was getting my haircut the other day, and there was this guy, clearly schizophrenic, talking to himself. And anyway, the lady getting her haircut before me said, I can't walk to my car. I'm like, I'll walk with you, and I'll talk to that guy. Right? His brain's not working well, but he's still got a brain. He's still a human being, and he deserves to be treated with some dignity, right? So again, if he were aggressive, then, we have to have a different conversation. But I think they're all people, and all our brains are working differently. Man, just go without sleep for a day, and you're a different human being.
Yeah, even that guy, he's having a completely different experience than you are, but still a fascinating one.
Absolutely. And so every one of us is having a different experience, right? So, think of taste and color and smell. We all perceive things differently. So there's no true reality. There's just your perception of reality, and it varies.
Which was, when I first understood that, blew my mind, because reality is your perception of it. Actuality is the experience, but we're seeing it through two completely different lenses.
Right. Similar for most people, but yeah, still going to be different. Hopefully. Yeah, hopefully, right.
Well, the last question here stems from the name of the podcast itself, Inputs Only, which I define as the inputs within your control that dictate the outcomes we desire. So it's the things that we can do to get to where we want to go. So you're one of the most cited scientists in history, and it's led to this incredible body of work that you books, papers, all of the above, and speak talks, even multiple TED Talks. What input of yours, as it relates to the action of learning, retaining, and distilling first principles, has provided the best return?
What a great question. Let me answer that with some thought. I think for me, the input, I'm going to do two things rather than one. One is I'm really curious. I'm just curious about everything, and I really embrace stupidity, my own. If I had known the stuff I was getting into, if I had known how hard it was and how difficult it would be to make progress, I probably never would have started. But being sort of naive, I'm using stupidity in a funny way, but being naive and curious are sort of two really good ingredients. If you can find an area where you're naive and curious, you're just going to be endlessly amused by discovering things. And so that's been sort of my secret. And stealing a lot. Stealing from the animal literature, creating my own protocols. Just, my lab, we build all kinds of stuff. Not that I'm an expert at anything, but I can find people to help me or whatever. And I'm still super curious about the humans. I find them to be a fascinating species.
Well, thank you for your time today. As we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to add or share?
So much fun. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.